Okay, so the instruction manual to being a vampire. It's about a nameless woman who arrives at a police station, drenched in blood and wearing a necklace of severed fingers, claiming that she is the witness to 33 murders. Through her interview with a detective, Detective Poole, we discover how she met Herwig Roth, an elderly vampire priest who serves justice in equal measure to the blood drained from each of his victims. And I think the tagline says it all when I say that these vampires don't play by the rules. This is not a conventional vampire book. If you think it's all about garlic and wooden stakes through the heart and crosses and all that kind of thing, all the gothic stuff, all the Anne Rice stuff, it's not. You have to go in and clear your head, and you will be surprised about what happens in that book.
Craig, I really was so tempted to just start this conversation just diving into nostalgia and acknowledging the fact that we've known each other forever and like going back in time, but I'm restraining myself, and I want to start by talking about your book because that's the whole reason we're here. So I've been reading books of yours for quite a while and enjoying everything that you put out. And so when I heard the title for this book and kind of figured out what it was about, I was very excited. And it makes me think of a couple things. The first thing I want to do, though, is acknowledge that Trueborn Press was nice enough to ask me to be someone who contributed a blurb for your book, which is a huge honor. And I took it very seriously. And so I got to show up on the back of your book, which I'm showing the camera for anybody who's watching the video here. Huge honor. And I just want to thank you for considering me for that.
No. And well, obviously I'm humbled that you actually did it. And more importantly, you nailed it, because when you get blurbs, there's this weird thing, you send it out, or you send the book out to authors who you admire, people you admire in the industry, anybody really. And then there's this long period where you're waiting, and they've got to try and get time to read it and then write something about it, and you don't know whether they're going to hit the themes, the feel of the book, if they're just going to describe what they felt at the end of the book. You just don't know. And some of them hit hard, and you kind of go, yes, that's what you want. And sometimes you want something quite punchy. Certainly for the front, you just kind of want, this was amazing, brilliant, best move, best, yes. Best book I've read in 15 years, something like that. That's what you want for the book cover at the front. However, there's times when, you need that padding out a bit. You need to flesh it out a bit. And when I read yours, it came back, and I was just like, yeah, Rob's nailed it. Rob's nailed the kind of thing where he got the Palahniuk stuff. I hadn't read the Blackbirds. I haven't read
the Miriam Black.
Yeah. But I kind of then, as soon as you mentioned it, I was like looking up, and I was like, yeah, it kind of fits. I can totally see it. So yeah, when you came back, I was thrilled. So thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
And so for anybody who's listening, I'll read what I said really quick, but then we'll kind of dig into where that came from for me. So I said, this story is what you get when Chuck Wendig's Miriam Black has a thirst for revenge and finds a father figure in a vampire priest. So that's the first part. And then Chuck Palahniuk fans will love this unnamed anti-hero protagonist and her adventures through loss, grief, and anger. And so I know that I'm dating myself by talking about Chuck Wendig's Miriam Black series, because like those books came out in the early 2010s. But that character is this like, the feel of that character really kind of is similar to what I get from this protagonist in your book, where, she's, I don't want to assign too strong of characteristics to your protagonist, but like the Miriam Black character is definitely like, I would say a little misanthropic and jaded and kind of edgy and not trusting of people. And like, she's had a hard life, and you can tell, she's not proper. She, swears and everything. And, but like somewhere inside of her is like this kind of core of like really caring about people, but it's just like she's protecting herself with this shell of being rough and being edgy and weird and stuff. So,
It's like
I'm not saying, yeah. And I'm not saying that's exactly like your character, but like reading this book, I was like, oh, this is the vibe I'm getting. It's very similar to this. So like, and that's a high compliment, because that series was fantastic. And, that's a really memorable character for me. Like, that's such a well-written female protagonist, who's just like, yeah, like that kind of thing. So that's kind of where the Miriam Black stuff came from. And I'm wondering how close am I hitting to what you wanted that protagonist to be?
I've always been attracted to strong characters. I'd rather, even when I'm reading, I'm more interested in reading a character-driven novel than maybe plot-driven. I know plot is always there, don't get me wrong, but if you've got a strong and interesting character, I'm more inclined to warm to it and, just keep running with it. I'm not really into, like plodding plots, that this is where we're heading towards. So when I designed the protag who remains nameless, pretty much 99% of that novel, she's nameless. She's mentioned roughly at the end. I said, okay, if I'm gonna do this, I need somebody who, as soon as they start to read that character, the readers are going to hold her hand and she's going to walk them through the rest of that book. So what do you do? How do you design somebody who is interesting, engaging, funny, all these things that pull you in? And what I generally do in that instance is I just magpie. I'll just borrow bits of people. I'll take a lot of sort of my inner dialogue, the stuff that we don't say, in public, the things that we hold back. The things that we want to say, obviously, she can say. My daughter was going through a difficult period at the time with social anxiety. She just started college, so she was kind of going through all these things. She developed emetophobia, which is this condition where you have a phobia of being sick. So she was going through counseling and various other things like that. So I'm pulling these things in. But what she also gave me was the strength to get through it, regardless of what was happening. And so where we begin the book, our protagonist has gone through quite a bit. She's lost both parents. She lives alone, and she's working as a barista. It's not some, big career. It was supposed to be just a stopgap. And she's just still, in a barista role, which is fine. People love doing that job, and you can make a good career out of it. But I think she saw it as a stepping stone to something else or move on. And she's not really respected in the workplace anyway. She's isolated from the rest of the gang, the clique. And it's her then sort of coming to terms with the passing of her mother and then the subsequent death of her father in a tragic fire incident at a nursing home. And then she's going to this counseling group, this grieving counseling group, where she meets all these other people. And theoretically, at those meetings, you should find a connection. There is a continuity amongst you all. And yet, again, she is isolated. So she's then going out into the world. And what essentially she's doing is she's trying to find this person she can connect with, a second father. And that's the Joseph Campbell theory that Chuck Palahniuk borrows from, for Fight Club, is that we're always searching for that second father. You might find it in your uncle, a friend. If we pick like Stand By Me, and you've got, Gordy and Chris, Chris is Gordy's second father, because his own father was shit. You know, he kind of isolated him. You know, when his brother died, you know, he detached from his own son, his living son. So that's what she does. And you build these characters and you hope that they resonate. You hope that they are strong enough to sort of carry the narrative as well. So when you compare it, going back to Miriam Black, and you mentioned that shopping list of various things, yes, totally. I can identify with all those different things which you've just mentioned, because you do want somebody who's interested. You do want somebody who's a bit quirky. You do want people to say the things that you want to say, you know, without the repercussions of what, you know, saying that thing and offending somebody. You want all those, and I always like writing comedy as well. Even though it's not something that I'm known for, a lot of my books are funny. You know, there's, you know, especially if we go back to the Sound of Loneliness, Daniel Crabtree was very funny, that protag. You know, he's very acerbic, but he was also funny. So I try to write humor in it. I think humor is a great way of depressurizing some of the gravity of certain scenes. You know, certainly if we're dealing with violence and themes of sexual assault and, you know, stuff like that, they help, you know. So she had to be funny. She had to sort of push it through. So yeah, I totally appreciate that connection with Miriam Black.
I like what you said about the humor too, and I know that it's not unique to Stephen Graham Jones, but I've definitely heard him say, like, with horror specifically, is like you have to like have those pressure releases throughout the story, like in order for kind of like the, I guess in this case, reader, but like, you know, if it's a movie, like viewer tolerance to be able to kind of like maintain, like if you have too much tension, like you have to release some tension to keep me involved and stuff, to make me not want to turn away or whatever. But yeah, so I guess similar, like you have this book has a lot, as you kind of alluded to, of heavy themes to the extent that there's like a page of content warnings. So I think it's important too, for like, you can't just sit through misery and suffering like 100% of the time. You got to have those kind of pressure releases and stuff too.
And it's important as well, even as a writer, that you don't want to immerse yourself too much in that yourself. You know, you're working through it, and you know, you need that moment to go, okay, I'm taking a breath here, and I need to just sort of, you know, do something which breaks the tension, whether it's, you know, just a simile, something, or you describe something in a certain way, use an analogy that's quite funny. You know, you just do something which just takes the person out of the moment just for a bit, because it might be just too intense. And then you're okay, you know. And it's that kind of release of endorphins as well. So if we go back to why we like horror, you know, there's loads of, you know, dissertations on it, and psychiatrists have looked at, psychologists have looked at it and stuff. But it is that thing of, it's a survival. It's that survival thing of, it's a fight or flight. We want to kind of live through it and survive, because as soon as we do, we get that rush of endorphins. So we don't get decapitated. We don't get the spike in our eye. We live through it. We are the final girl, and that is good for us. So that's what you're trying to do when you're writing. You're trying to get the person totally immersed in the scene, and then allow them to live, so that they can then go, oh, okay, and take a breath.
This is kind of related to what you were saying. I was on a panel like a couple of years ago, and one of the topics on the panel was like why people are attracted to horror. And that caused me to kind of calcify a theory, which like make it really easy to say. And what it came down to for me is that like people typically go to horror for a few reasons. Either you're examining a fear that you have, you're kind of looking at or like exploring a trauma you've experienced, or you're preparing. So
for something.
yeah, like, so, and my example with the preparing is like, you really have something about like home invasion has always been something that's really scary for you. And if you like watch a bunch of home invasion stuff, maybe you pick up some ideas of like how to get through that. But so that for me was kind of it connects with what you're saying is like, I think at the end of the day, also, it's just the idea of like the opportunity to see someone survive, like you said.
Yeah, I'll jump in at this point only because when you said that you're preparing. The thing is, they say that nightmares are a way of that. That people used to dream about meeting a lion, wherever they were, or drowning, or whatever it is. It was them sort of prepping, sort of getting used to the potential death possibility, so they were kind of training their brain to react better should it happen. Now, I'll have that to a point, but I watched Eden Lake. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a British movie.
No.
And you say that you like, say, Home Invasion, you got, what's the Mike Flanagan one, which is brilliant? Hush. Am I right? Hush. I think it is Hush, about
I think so.
The deaf woman. And that's a great home invasion movie. And then you've got The Strangers and things like that.
Yeah.
I can kind of watch them. But with Eden Lake, it's about a normal couple who go to this lake, and there's a group of teenagers there, sort of 15 plus, years old. And they then start to terrorize this couple, and it becomes very real. And I can't watch that movie because it's one of those things whereby that could really, really happen. That is so close to something that could happen on a regular basis that I kind of don't want to see it.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to know that it is possible. Like with home invasion, yeah, it's definitely possible, but it's unlikely. It's on the periphery of, the likelihood of it is pretty kind of small in terms of everything else. But Eden Lake, you go out anywhere and you're slightly isolated from the community, and anything could happen, and that scares the shit out of me. So I kind of go, I don't need to prep for that. I know what's going to happen. I'm going to go into fight mode, well, I don't know, actually. I've never been in that situation, but I would imagine that I would have to try and fight my way out of it, But that's the kind of thing which worries me. And with horror, I do like living through the moment, and I do like seeing various things happen to people because you do survive. But there are certain areas that I don't particularly like to go to. That is definitely one, Eden Lake. And I think the other one was, what's the Scarlett Johansson book? Is it Under the Skin? I think it's called Under the Skin. And there is a scene in that where they're on a beach, and I think that somebody's probably going to contact you and say this is wrong, but a father goes out into the sea to rescue his dog or his wife, and they leave the baby on the beach, and the baby's crying, and then he gets caught in the riptide or something, and they both basically die, and there's this baby on the beach on its own, and then she walks away, and it's just knowing that baby's always going to be there on its own, no one around. And that just kills me. And once I saw that scene, I was like, no, done.
Yeah.
Gotta move on. So, yeah.
I had that with, this is not horror, but with the show Breaking Bad. I could not watch that because the whole thing starts out with a guy who's like got a cancer diagnosis, and it was before I had cancer, and that was my biggest fear like in my life was to have cancer. And so everybody's like, this show is great. You got to watch this show. And I was like, I am not going any fucking where near that show because I don't want to think about that thing. I can't let that be in my mind because that is like, I'm terrified of it. And so like, I just could not touch it. And I still haven't seen the show, but having had, and gotten through cancer and being in remission, now it's like, I've faced the biggest fear I ever had. I could probably watch that show, but like, I don't recommend people face their fears the way that I did.
No, it's usually
involuntarily like that. But like that. It's interesting how like there's things that just like they're going to push you in a way that you just can't handle being pushed. And so like, although that experience I would say makes me more inclined to be more confrontational of fears I have. But at the same time, there's definitely stuff where I'm like, I can't go there. Like,
it's relatable. I think that's it. Your fear was cancer, so therefore, you don't go anywhere near any program, movie, whatever that involves cancer to avoid it, which is completely understandable. And then if you've been through it on the other side, sometimes it can be a trigger, and these are the things. That's why we have, going back to the book, you have these trigger warnings at the back. If you've experienced any of these, just be mindful that they're there. They're not overt. Some of them, they're sort of more implied. Some of them are overt, but you just need to be aware of them. Yeah. And it's understandable because what you don't want to do is completely alienate your audience. But the thing is, with the baby on the beach and with the teenagers at the lakeside, they're kind of universal. Even if you're not a parent, you can empathize and sympathize with what's going on with certain situations. And if you're not in a relationship, you can still understand that if you go to a lakeside on your own, there's potential to be, in a fight or stabbed or whatever by some hooligans. So some of them are universal, and that's the key. That's how you do that and still keep your audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I know that people love Under the Skin. They love it. It's a movie, and I know Eden Lake is a very good movie as well, and it's revered. But for me, it's too close to me, and I have to step back. For me personally, and I'll watch anything. I've watched Man Bites Dog, the Belgian movie where people walked out of the cinema. And it's weird. But there are certain things that hit home. Right? Mm-hmm. It's unique sometimes.
What comes to mind is you're absolutely right. Like you have to kind of play it a certain way so as to not alienate your audience. The way that you handle it is not like, oh, let's throw this gross adversity at a protagonist just to give them something to engage with. It's like almost like this exists because like the book, it wouldn't be right without it. Like there has to be a necessity to the really awful thing that's hard to look at. Otherwise, you will alienate. And so, things in this book, like anytime really honestly that like sexual abuse, I'm saying in general for all books, like sexual abuse exists. I think that there was, not even too long ago, like in the last couple decades, almost like a fatigue of people being like, why does the woman have to be sexually abused in order for this story to exist? But that doesn't mean stories can't have that. It's just like approaching it in a way that makes sense, that honors the experience, I'm struggling my words a little bit, but
you have to handle it sensitively. That's the way I go into all of it. If, I've never wrote, a rape scene or anything like that because it's not for me to do and I wouldn't do it. And if there is any sort of sexual assault, sexual abuse, it's mostly implied. Certainly with this book,
Yeah.
we never. It's kind of something that's suggested may have happened, and I would never write that particular thing because I can't come from a point of authority on it, and I don't want to, and I certainly don't want to offend anybody. I'm very careful about that, and you also have to be mindful as a writer. Is what you're about to write going to push the narrative forward? Or is it going to be a speed bump, a literary speed bump that people won't get over? Because what is the point? And I've always kind of approached it that way because I don't want somebody just to say, well, you just wrote that just to shock. You know, why write that scene? It's just to shock somebody. And you think, right, if I ever get asked that question, I have to answer it in the correct way. Not just go, yeah, I kind of wrote it because I just wanted to get a laugh or whatever. So I always go back to this chap. No, not this chap. The guy who wrote, I just remembered I've not got the right T-shirt on. William Peter Blatty, who wrote The Exorcist. He's in a room at his typewriter and he's banging away at the keys. And he's building his narrative in a structure which sits firstly in reality. So it's very kind of medical driven. It's very factual, and the mother takes the daughter to the doctors, the psychiatrists, all those all these professionals to get their opinion because she thinks it has to be related to something, either a sort of neurological issue or, a sort of, something. And he's kind of building it that way, which is the logical way to do it. Then he's going, okay, I've done that, but I've also got a story about the devil. Now, how do you convince a person who doesn't believe in the devil that the devil exists? So if you take Chris O'Neill, who's the mother, and she has no particular religious leaning, how do you convince somebody that the devil exists and that devil or demon is in her daughter? So it's not a neurological issue. Okay. They have to do something that is completely out of character, completely, for a 12-year-old girl. What is it that I can do to that, or get that 12-year-old girl? What can she do that will convince her mum that girl is possessed? And then you have the genital mutilation scene. Mm-hmm. And I'll use that term because that's what it is. I know people use the quote unquote masturbation with the crucifix scene, but it's not, it's genital mutilation. Right. And that, once that happens, the mother can't go back. She can't go back to the doctors. She has to lean on the church. So you have to push the narrative forward. And I think what happened was Blatty did that for that purpose, that when that scene happens and he sat in front of an audience and they go, why did you do that? What you just did that to shock. He can qualify it because it helps the prose. It helps the narrative. It pushes it, to where he needs to get it. So when you're a writer and you're doing that, you have to go, okay, I want to kind of put something in that is a bit, gory and a bit bloody, but it's got to fit. It has to fit. So, because if it doesn't fit and you're just doing it for shock, the reader is very clever. They will just pick up on it and they will shut that book and just go, yeah, I'm done.
Yeah.
So I'm always mindful of it. And I hope throughout my careers, writing horror, that people look at those books and read it and see that, I have tried to do that constantly. There are some scenes that are well described, shall we say, in terms of their gore, but it's offset by, like I say, pushing that narrative forward.
And the first thing that comes to mind is like, even in the description of this book, a nameless woman arrives in a police station drenched in blood and wearing a necklace of severed fingers. And so like the immediate question I think that you can qualify for that specific situation is what is her story that made her be a person who could, because we don't know what happened when we just read just that, what made her someone who's cutting off people's fingers? Or alternatively, what did those people do to deserve
to have the fingers taken off? Yeah.
Their finger, at least to have their hands mutilated, maybe more. So yeah, I think that necklace of fingers.
I think even above that is, why the fuck are you making it into a necklace? Why is it not just in a bag?
Right. Yeah.
It's like it's like a piece of jewelry.
Yeah.
At what point?
It's like trophies almost. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. At what point are you coming into the police station, adorning that like it's, I don't know, something like you'd normally wear on the high street?
Right. And so and that is paid off in the story. But you at the very beginning said without saying, something massive happened, and we're going to get there. And then when we get to that massive thing that happened, it is everything you just said. Whatever happens is justified. It moves the plot forward. It's horrible, but it suits the story. But I love that kind of big promise. You can't just say someone walks into a police station with a necklace full of severed fingers without that being a promise. And then when I hear that promise, my thought is are you going to fulfill that promise? How are you going to? I know I use the word promise a lot when I'm talking about different stories that I've read and everything, where there's a moment where I'm oh, there's no way you can do this without that being a big thing later on.
Yeah.
And that was a promise. And having read this book, I think you came through in that promise in a surprising but very satisfying way. And I hope it's not spoilery, but in a way that is in service of justice.
Yes. Yeah. And I'll say now that I'm not I don't outline. I never, kind of plan it out. I'm not. We have a mutual writer friend called Craig Clevenger, who's very good at doing that so well. The guy, will have calendars and mark off dates, and he'll have timelines and various things. And I think John Updike as well, he has the final line written above his desk, and he's aiming towards. I can't do that. I've tried it, and it just doesn't work for me. It becomes too contrived, too controlling. My wings are clipped. So when I went into that book, it generally plays out as a scene in my head. Because at the end of the day, I'm not a writer. Okay, I'm not. I am a frustrated film director who directs movies in ink. So that's me. So I see everything as scenes. And I had this scene of this girl, young woman, getting out of a car maybe, and she's covered head to toe in blood. And she walks into a police station. And that's a shock. Okay? Everybody sat there ready to report a crime, sees this girl walk in, and they're like, holy shit, what's happened to her? And then I went, right, okay, that's good. That's a good beginning. That's a good catalyst. But let's take it up a notch. What else can she have on her? Does she have a knife? Does she have an axe? Does she have something else? No, okay. Let's have body parts. Let's have something on her that's kind of like, an ear or, an eye or something. Just have something on her. And I went, well, fingers are kind of cool. And you could probably put lots of fingers together. And would it be cool if you just made a necklace out of it? And it's kind of evolving like that. And I'm going, okay, so why has she got a necklace of severed fingers? And you just, as a writer, you just keep asking yourself questions and questions and questions and questions until you start to see different scenes. So then I go, okay, Well, let's do it as a kind of usual suspects kind of structure where you kind of take in the person, in a police station, and they're telling you the story of how they got there. So that's your structure. Okay, so we're starting at the end, pretty much, and they're going to tell you what's happening. Okay, so how did they get there? And then you just plan it out like that. So I don't outline. And when people read it and they go, holy shit, that opening chapter, that was pretty much me. That's how I felt when I wrote it. When it came, I was like, holy shit, okay. But now it has to pay off. Exactly. It has to pay off. How are you going to do it, Craig? Because you can't do that and then leave your audience or your readers going, it's a bit, okay, yeah, fine, get it,
right.
And that's where that's my job, to sort of kind of really push it and push myself to get there.
Well, the payoff is there. So anybody who's listening, the payoff is there, and I think that you did it justice. And I want to kind of take a moment to acknowledge that we haven't yet talked about a vampire priest. And it's crazy that we've talked about this story for as long as we have without acknowledging the fact that there is a vampire priest in this book. So Herwig Roth is this vampire priest that becomes that kind of second father to her. But with the introduction of this vampire priest, there's also an introduction of so much ambiguity, I would say. And I have to imagine that if you're like a young you're anybody of any age, and you run into someone and ostensibly they tell you, oh, I'm a vampire, that you're going to be questioning whether that's real or not. And so ambiguity exists with just the existence of someone who's saying that they're a vampire in general. But I also want to say that you used ambiguity so effectively in this book, and I'm nervous about saying how and everything, but even after I finished reading the book and you and I were going back and forth about it, our conversation was ambiguous too. So so it's one of those books where I think it benefits from the fact that you can interpret what happened, you can interpret what was real and what was kind of made up or more a story. And those different interpretations still give you a satisfying kind of conclusion to the story. So I just want to acknowledge that the ambiguity that you put in the story supports it, enhances it. Yeah, it's like a really good presence. So I don't know if I want to talk about vampire priest or just the use of ambiguity in the story. I'll let you kind of go with whichever direction you'd prefer to.
Okay. So when you're right, you introduce a vampire and it's like, okay, instantly somebody has to suspend disbelief.
Right.
You have to, because, it's like introduce zombies or whatever. There's a point where you have to just suspend disbelief and say, okay, I've got to kind of rewind. So you have to keep me on track here. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm doing this Tarantino thing where I'm going to go off on one. But essentially, the genesis of this book came from the title. Now, I'm notoriously bad at titles for my books. Okay. I hate writing them. They generally come way after the book's written, and I'm scrambling around the prose trying to find a line, something that kind of ties it all together. I hate it. And invariably, most of my titles are very long. I have to work on that, because what I've realized in social media now is it takes me an age just to put the fucking title down. I should just go down the Richard Thomas route of just one line.
One words. Yeah.
Yeah. Just transubstantiation. Yeah, so you got a plug, you see, Richard. There you go. So you do that. Okay, I'll use Chuck Palahniuk as well, because he's got Lullaby, Diary, Choke, Survivor, and it's a lot easier to write. But it came. So I essentially started at the point where I had the instruction manual to being A. That was it. And I thought, that's a good title. What could it be? The instruction manual to being A. So I'm racking my brains and I'm going, well, what have you not written about? So I'm thinking, right, well, I've wrote a zombie story. I've wrote a werewolf story. I mean, these are short prose, short stories. Okay, what about the instruction manual to being a serial killer? Well, that's kind of good. So I'm playing it around in my head, yeah. And I'm thinking, well, okay, let's flesh it out a bit. So now somebody's going to steal this idea now. But essentially, I had the idea where there was a group of serial killers that came together biannually or whatever it was to have a meeting to it was like a support group. And essentially, you talk to each other and you make sure nobody's stealing your MO. Decapitation's mine. You don't do decapitation of your victims, okay? That's my thing. I kind of like to, flay them of skin, okay? That's Jed's thing, and they all come together and they say, right, well, you can't go into that territory as well. That's my territory, so you stay away. So I had this idea that it was kind of like a support group for serial killers. I think, okay, that's okay. Take it further, Craig. What else are you going to do? Because that's an okay idea, but where's it going to go? And I thought, well, maybe this new vampire comes in who's a girl. Vampire. I'm getting things mixed up. The serial killer comes in who's a girl. And what you then find is that some of the serial killers start to die, get killed off. And you realize that that's her MO, that she's going around killing serial killers. Like bad people, she's killing them.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, yeah, that might work, but is it enough? Is there enough? And I just hit a wall. I just couldn't get past it. So then I'm like, okay, let's go back to the title. The instruction manual to being a what? And then I realized I'd watched 70-something vampire movies on Letterboxd. And in comparison, I'd read half a dozen vampire books. And what I found was they were all kind of the same, with a few exceptions. They were all kind of traditional tropes in there. There was, they're afraid of sunlight, garlic, wooden stake, all that kind of stuff. So I went, okay, well, why don't you write a vampire story that's non-conventional? How could you build a vampire that is real, where the person you're telling it to doesn't need to suspend so much disbelief? So what you do then is I go, right, okay, what's the common denominator in every vampire? And it's blood. They just need blood. They need to feed on blood. That is the root, the foundations of every vampire. Humans, we need transfusions every now and again, but generally it's after an accident or whatever. But there are people and they have conditions whereby they do need regular transfusions. And I'm looking through and I'm going through medical, pages on the internet, and I'm kind of going through and I hit upon thalassemia, where the person doesn't, I think, if I'm getting this right, produce enough red blood cells. So the hemoglobin it's low. So they need regular transfusions. And this could be, I think the most generally is about once a month, maybe a bit more, that they would have these transfusions. So I said, well, just crank that up to 11. What if somebody needs it every day? And what if then the system fails them? What if the hospitals don't want to give them because there's too much blood that they're taking? Where could you harvest that blood from? Okay, now you're getting somewhere. So why don't you write a vampire story that builds on that and call it the instruction manual to being a vampire? Okay, I'm warming to that. But keep some of the elements of the serial killer thing, because essentially vampires are just serial killers. Just going around killing lots of people. And if you take that their MO is that they only drain from bad people, you've got something else then. They're kind of like you're rooting for them. You want them to go around and do this. So that's how it sort of evolved, and it was then, okay, that's fine, but who's going to be your vampire, and how are they getting to people? And I thought, you need somebody who's trusted in the community. You need somebody. So elderly people generally are more trusted because there's no fear really in the community of elderly people. And you had the layer of, the church on top of that. I'm not saying that every priest is trustworthy without going down a rabbit hole, but
fair enough.
Yeah, most of the time they are. So you kind of build on that and you say, right, well, if it's a vampire priest and you go and speak to them on their deathbed, or you go and speak to them in a prison, or if you go and speak to them in a bar, the likelihood is they are going to confess their sins to somebody. And the priest is the person they're going to do it to. And then you're getting bad blood. Bad people blood, I should say. And that's your way in. But you also need bait as well. You need bait. And that's where then the two characters align. You have the person, the nameless protag who's searching for that second father, who needs a distraction in life and a reason to keep on living. And you've got a sort of vampire priest, elderly priest, who's doing okay, but could do with somebody there just to lure some more nasty people in. Because if they see her, if they objectify her, they see her as, somebody that they can maybe, predators. If they see her that she's easy prey, he can then intervene. And that's kind of how the relationship builds. So that's why I have a priest as a vampire. Just go full circle back to your original question.
It works, and it's kind of catchy and everything. Like, I think that the eyebrows go a little higher when it's a vampire priest instead of just like a priest or just a vampire. Like those two things combined are a little more interesting. So, and that kind of partnership is interesting too, because it is not. Sometimes when you get in these situations, and I think one of the things that has always kind of bothered me about, like, when someone is a new vampire, suddenly they're just totally cool with murdering people. Like that bothers me. And that the thing that I appreciated about the way your story plays out is that your protagonist is like hesitantly cooperating with the situation. Like, she is kind of more there for the camaraderie and the friendship or whatever, than to just like mete out justice. But there are bumps along the road where it's not easy for her to kind of reconcile some of the things that have happened, and she's questioning if she's really being told the truth, and questioning how much she believes the story she's getting and everything. So it's not that thing of just like, yes, let's go hurt bad guys right away. It's like there's more nuance. It's like a slow transition from I was a barista who was frustrated, to me and this vampire priest are finding victims. So it feels realistic is what I'm trying to say. It doesn't feel like that just wholesale, well, it's the next day and all of a sudden I'm like a crusading, like vigilante kind of thing.
And I think some of the stuff that Herwig does, the vampire priest, shocks her. I mean, there's the scene in the sex shop, and there's the scene with the rolling pin. Even though they are kind of like 2 or 3 deaths in, he still does things which makes her go, whoa, I'm like, this is, you can just do it a different way. Remember the first guy, we just kind of just put the line in, and we just drained him with the pipe. Do you remember that? Yeah. Why can't we just do that? She's still questioning his motives, behind why he's so, violent towards some people. And it is a sort of natural thing. And I think the turning point is there's a part in the book where she wants justice to be served, and it's to a family who's obviously been exposed to certain chemical elements of feces, like pig's feces and stuff like that, from fertilizations, fertilizing lawns and stuff like that. And she kind of then buys into it. There's some people, who deserve more. There's some people you can just drain because they do a misdemeanor, a kind of, a low-level transgression. And then there are people who do major things that, really deserve being butchered. And then it builds and builds to the point of, I'll mention the name of it, and if anybody wants to go and look this up, but the Scramble, which is a organized event that borrows from history. So they used to have these things called the Scramble. So if you look them up, you kind of get ahead of the game. And it's not a big spoiler, but the way I've engineered it, you want those people in there to suffer. You really do. And you go in, buy into it, and you allow the blood to pour because, again, it pushes the narrative forward. You do need to see that act of revenge take place. And the great thing is, it's not just done by a male, elderly vampire priest. It's by women uniting and kicking against, that oppression, that whatever they've experienced, that abuse. And it's just, for me, that was a lot to do with what was happening at the time on the media, with Epstein, and Harvey Weinstein. All that was by osmosis, was bleeding into the prose. And I had to address it. I had to just say, these guys are pricks and they deserve what. And that's what you do, is you kind of, like I was saying, horror allows you to do the things or say the things that you want to say, but you can't say, or do the things that you want to do that you can't do. And I just wanted to see these guys suffer on media. And so what I'm doing is, I'm going to write it down, and this is what happens to those people in my book, and they deserve it.
Yep. And they 100%, million% deserve it. Yeah, absolutely. That ties into a theme of reading that I've been doing lately that I'm really into, which is female rage. And I feel like part of it could just be me becoming more aware of it as a not woman. But like, there's a book I read called The Change by Kirsten Miller, which is like a few women discover they have kind of like witchy kind of powers, and they use those powers to punish men who deserve it. There's what did I read recently? There's a book that's coming out in October called It Looks Like You in the Dark, and it's Native American, takes place in Alaska, and so it's like this indigenous folk horror kind of thing, but like it is women punishing men who deserve way worse than punishment. So like this ties into that kind of thing, which I've really been kind of vibing with lately, which is not, and I love this change. It's like the women don't need up to be saved. The women don't need someone else to make justice happen. They become empowered, and they access the power that's already in themselves, and make justice happen and tap into the justifiable rage that they have and everything. So the movie The Bride, actually, Maggie Gyllenhaal's movie, is absolutely that as well. So like, I think that when I read the instruction manual to being a vampire, got that vibe too, at that part of the book where I was like, I'm so here for this. Sign me up. I think the days of the knight arriving in shining armor are gone, and I'm also acutely aware that I am a male writer, and I have to be very careful, but also sympathetic and compassionate, and I can't be empathetic because I've never lived through some of the things which obviously some people have lived through. But I know that as a father of a daughter,
and my wife, and hearing what they say. There's a section in the book where the protagonist talks about they get given a seminar on how to protect themselves. So they use the key, the key, you kind of put it in your fist, so the key bit you put in the lock is sticking out so you can stab somebody with it, or scratch the face with it. And they're teaching young women to protect themselves against predators. What they're not doing is teaching the fucking predators to stop being fucking predators. It's like, you need to just protect yourself. It's like, no, fuck that. You need to go to the young men of the world and change their opinion on how you should be seeing women and how you should be, how you should be sort of respecting women. That's what you should be doing. So I also have a son. He's very young and I'm very keen on it. And I remember ages ago watching Emma Watson. It is Emma Watson, isn't it, from the Harry Potter movies?
Yes.
Yes. She gave a speech on feminism and she said something that kind of resonated, which was, you don't need to be a woman to be a feminist. Men can be feminists. They can, they can educate the children. They can do that. And that's always been something that I've tried to do as much as possible. And I've listened to my family, my daughter and my wife, and that whole bit with the seminar and protecting yourself came from my wife, who went through that. She had one of these seminars. And it just struck me as a strange thing. So when I was writing that end scene, or end chapter, or the penultimate chapter, I was like, I went into it with a little bit of trepidation because I didn't want to offend anyone.
Right.
I didn't want it to come back at me saying, well, you're just a guy writing about female, empowerment. What do you know? And yes, I'm not a person who can truly identify with that, but I'm also a human being who understands that it's not right. And I want to address it in some way. And what's been really, really nice is we're still in the infancy of the book reaching people, but it's been really nice to have people come back and say there's strong feminist themes and that, they are rooting for her. And that really lifts my heels, because it is what I hoped to achieve, and I'm hopeful that when the female demographic read it, that they will feel like justice has been served on these individuals, but also for maybe young men to read it and understand as well that this is potentially a point where they have to reflect on what their behavior is like around women as well. So that's, you're just trying to do it that way.
So many things come to mind. I'll just kind of say a couple things really quick. So I've been with my girlfriend for 6 years, and at some point we were talking about horror, and she just said to me, every day in a woman's life is horror. And immediately I completely understood. I didn't completely understand, don't get me wrong, but I understood the truth of it immediately. And I was talking to someone else and I said that she had said that. And there was a woman in this, I was talking to a group of people and I said, oh, my girlfriend said this thing. And it was really kind of eye-opening for me. And a woman in the group of people I was talking to just immediately started saying things that she can't do because she's a woman. I can't fall asleep with my window open. I can't go to my car in the parking lot at night to get something out of my car. And she started listing these things that never occur to me as being potentially dangerous, as just things that she knows better. And that was so sobering. But then I was reading the Change book, which is so fantastic, and reading other books. And I was calling out these quotes that I found very profound and, really connected with to my girlfriend, who had read it before and told me to read it. And she's like, yeah, And like her response of being like, yeah, duh. In contrast to my, like, it stopped me in my tracks and I had to stop and think about it and talk about it, illustrated as well that like how naive I am about the day-to-day experience of women. And so what that drives me to do is to read more of these things, or, you know, talk more about the stories and the reality that women face, as opposed to just being like, oh, I'm a dumb guy, like, educate myself, stay in the discomfort of knowing that this is a common thing. Even when I got a vasectomy last year, and the doctors were like so like gentle with me, and they're like, oh, you know, for pain we can give you all these pain medications, and for anxiety we can give you these like drugs ahead of time and everything. And in my mind, as they're telling me all these things they can do, I was like, what would you give a woman? And it would be nothing. They would not offer them anything. But also, when I was going through the consultation for it, one of the things the urologist told me was, you know, your girlfriend can just wear an IUD. And I was like,
put it back on her. Yeah, you keep your junk the way it is.
Right. Like, it was so imperative to protect my my fertility. And it was so shocking. I was like, if this was the other way around.
Yeah. I think, sorry, go on. Yeah.
It just like, it was like, I felt overprotected. Whereas like, if it was a woman trying to do something, it would be blaming and depriving them of options. And I felt like they were trying to protect me from the situation as opposed to like condemn me for being in the situation. It just felt it felt hypocritical. It felt gross. And so I was like, I don't want those drugs. I don't want this extra treatment. Like, and turns out vasectomy is kind of one of the easiest things anybody can ever do. So like, if you're listening and you're considering it, it's almost, unless there's a complication, it's almost effortless and painless. So that's extra frustrating. But anyway, like, yeah, so now I'm just kind of more aware of like those kind of differences and the privilege that I experienced just being a dude.
I think that you're aware, that you are, you know, awake to those moments when they happen, is part of what we should be doing as men, is just understanding as much as we can and putting ourselves in that situation and questioning why certain things happen the way they happen. I did something with work. It was a project that I was doing with work, and we had to liaise with the trans community. So we had a couple of representatives from the trans community come into work and talk to us about their journey. And I also attended a seminar. And you kind of have this preconceived idea of what that journey is. And you go, instantly you just go, it must have been difficult. You know, it must have been difficult, you know, to firstly have that epiphany moment, realize that you needed to change, and then start the process of the transition. What I didn't understand was the nuances of that particular journey. And there was one moment where it kind of really hit hard when this individual said that what you have to do is, if you need to just go and get milk from the shop or bread, you need to plan your route that is completely different to everybody else. Because if you walk down the main streets, if you walk down whatever it is, you know, the most populated areas, you run the risk of being mocked. And sometimes it's this one slight remark that is the tipping point for them to consider taking their life. It's not that particular comment is so bad that it causes that trigger. It's that there's been 1,000 before it, and it's built, and it's an accumulative effect. So what you do is you manage your life differently. You navigate streets differently. You avoid certain places, and when you start to consider that as just a lifestyle thing, where for most people, it's easy just to leave your house, go down the street, go get a pint of milk or whatever it is and come back home. That is a huge undertaking for certain people. And it's that thing of like, I'm now awake to that. I am now consciously aware of those different things that happen. And it had a huge impact on me. So much so that it did, because writers deal with it in different ways. I wrote a story about it, which became the title to the short story collection, The Skin We Feel Most Comfortable In. And I had to wrap it up in a little bit of magical realism, but it was something which I felt I had to kind of address in some way. I didn't write it from a trans person's perspective because I felt that was, not my place to do that. So I do it from a different perspective, looking in. But I felt that it was important to discuss that and raise it in some way. And the same with what women go through on a day-to-day basis, which we as men do not consider, in the slightest scary, fearful, whatever, is to somebody else. And as soon as we become more aware of it, I think then there is a catalyst of changes that we adapt slightly to those changes and we kind of work together. But we're a long way off because there are still fucking pricks in the world.
Oh my God, seriously.
Yeah, just kind of still go back to that Neanderthal state. And I don't know when it'll happen. And I'm hoping I'll never see it in my generation, but I hope that in future generations, it starts to change.
There's a lot of fingers waiting to be on necklaces out there.
Definitely.
I want to talk about some other stuff, so I'll wrap up the conversation about Instruction Manual to Being a Vampire by just saying I thought it was a great story, and I really enjoyed it. And all of those kind of subtle elements that we talked about worked together so well. So if you're listening, you got to read this book. It's so good. And I've just really benefited from knowing you for, the amount of time I've known you, that I've seen your craft just get stronger and stronger. And I can't say enough good stuff about this book. So anybody listening, definitely buy it, read it. I was lucky enough through Trueborn directly to get, I got for anybody's watching the video, the red edges on the book, and it looks really great. Which from what I understand, she's doing on her own. Like, she's doing this herself.
Yes,
right?
she's inking them herself. Yes.
So
it's an arduous task, but it's much appreciated.
Made with love. It's fantastic. So, I just really, I've known you long enough to say I'm proud of the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Rob.
And with that, we'll talk about how long I've known you, because there was a recent anniversary. And this I only remember because I get like Facebook memories and stuff. But a couple weeks ago, there was a 15th anniversary of this anthology, Warmed and Bound, in which you have a story in. And
can we just pause on that, because you said 15th anniversary, which means it was released 15 years ago, and I'm quite sure there's a lot of people listening or watching this going, wait a minute, Craig's been right for 15 years. I only know the guy from this one book. Can I just say to all those people, it's been a fucking long runway. And I'm still on the runway. I've still yet to take off, but I have been in it a long time. Yes, Rob was there from the beginning.
I was there from the beginning. So, well, and then I will point out the is there a name for your trilogy? Is it the
Tom Nolan trilogy?
Nolan trilogy? Yeah, Bad People and Labyrinth of I'm not going to remember.
Labyrinth of the Dolls and The Ghost of Stormer Hill.
Excellent. I would say, detective forward horror-ish trilogy. It's like kind of like a crime procedural, but like, so good, that series. So it's not like you just like, there's, once you start reading Craig stuff, if you're new to reading Craig stuff, you got great options. So there's definitely really good stuff. I remember The Sound of Loneliness we talked about back in the day. Yeah, we've been around. So 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, like, the reason that I wanted to bring it up is, like, because there was a website called The Velvet, and that website was in support of Craig Clevenger, who came up earlier, Will Christopher Bear, and Stephen Graham Jones. And I think you can see, my Clevenger and Bear books are up here next to my little screen painting. So anyway, and so there was a forum, and on that forum there were a bunch of writers, and I think that was kind of a spillover from also The Cult, which was Chuck Palahniuk's kind of forum back in the day. But those two websites, but specifically The Velvet, there was a ton of writers involved with The Velvet, and this was a project where, if I remember correctly, basically it was like writers who were involved in The Velvet or in the orbit of The Velvet all contributing to this anthology. And it was like, basically, this is the community that we are, is kind of the feel I got for it.
Yeah.
That came out a few months after I started podcasting. I started podcasting in April of 2011, and this came out in July of 2011. So that, in the early part of my podcasting career, this book was the people that I was talking to. And it's a star-studded cast, and you, like, some of the names that you see in here. Back then, it was like we were all pretty much, there was
peers.
some kind of
we were peers to a point. There was some that had a few books out. I'm sure you'll go through the names shortly. There was some of us cutting our teeth in the writing world, but we were all kind of just regular people. We weren't, superstars in any any stretch of the imagination. Some have gone on to better things, but you name the list. There's some cool people.
And that's peers. Peers is a good way to say it. I'll call out some of the names that are, like, more recognizable. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but, like, Craig Clevenger, we've mentioned, he has a story in the book. Craig Davidson, for anybody who maybe doesn't recognize Craig Davidson as a name, that's Nick Cutter.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's Nick Cutter's kind of a well-known name. Let's see, we've got Brian Evanson. Brian Evanson was involved. We've got Jeremy Robert Johnson.
Sorry, just to go back to Brian. Was Brian part of the Velvet? I
don't
was he
think
a kind
so.
of periphery character, or did we just admire him? I think he was one of the people that we admired, and we kind of asked a favor maybe to bring him in. I know he wasn't a regular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's more accurate. Yeah.
Because just so people know what the Velvet is, it was a forum essentially.
Yep.
And you would just start
like a fan club kind of.
Yeah. And we would just.
But also like a writing community, and like it was a very strong community of people who were very passionate about the books they were reading, but also the craft of writing and everything. Yeah.
And there was just the other person that you jumped in.
Jeremy Robert Johnson.
There you go. The loop.
Fantastic. Stephen Graham Jones has a story in here.
Who's that guy?
Might heard of him. I don't know. Yeah, he's got a thing or two. He's been on President Obama's summer reading list, so that's kind of a big deal. We've got. I'll call out Cameron Pierce. Cameron hasn't really had a lot going on in the last 10 years or so, but he was the publisher of Lazy Fascist Press. He was in the Bizarro scene, and he has a book coming out in November. So, cool. Through Clash Books. So Cameron Pierce was a big name back then. You got Richard Thomas, who continues to publish books. I feel like he's more editing stuff lately. I don't know. But anyway, Richard has carried through his writing career for quite a while. Paul Tremblay, you might have heard of him. Craig Wallwork's on this list as well. So like, but it's like 35 authors. Some of them, many continue to still publish. Some of them have kind
Nick
of
Corpin
hung
on
up.
there. Is it Nick Corpin? On there?
Yeah, Nick Corpman's on
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
is Amanda Gowin?
Amanda Gowin's on there. Yep.
See, I can't let this opportunity go without talking about Amanda, because she is one of the most underrated writers that I know. Every time I've talked to her most days over like 20 years, just emails, I used to do it daily. It's lapsed a little bit because we're just busy with life. But when she just emails me, I'm in awe of her emails, the way she words them and the way she describes life. And she's got the attitude and the work ethic that I kind of want, which is, I don't care about the sort of social media side. I don't care about being in the limelight. I'm just going to write stuff that I want to write about. And she nails it. She totally nails it when she does it. And then she'll surface and she'll drop something and then disappear again. And I just go, oh, that's what I want to do. And she does it so well. And if you don't know Amanda's work, you just need to go and grab something by it. Radium Girl, something like that. Just go and grab it. She's an amazing writer.
Yeah, she's fantastic. She's a fantastic writer for sure. And I know that you guys have been writing buddies for like the whole time. Yeah. Oh, Matt Bell. Matt Bell is another author that's in here. Yeah. But like, there's a ton of names I didn't mention, but like you said, there wasn't a hierarchy of this book. You were all peers. It was kind of like a flat level. Everybody was showing up and contributing. And it was just kind of like a love letter to the community, but man, like such fantastic stories, such a fantastic experience of like, I was looking at the Amazon listing recently and I had completely forgotten, but I contributed to the ebook, which I completely forgot about. So in the ebook,
was it Red River or something River?
Is it your shorts? No, the short stories in my anthology, which we'll talk about in a minute. But,
okay, right.
I did some sort of like essay or something at the end of the book. And then we also contributed some transcribed interviews for the ebook as well with some of the people from the anthology. But 15 years ago, this group came together and just made an astonishingly good anthology. And in a lot of ways that launched my podcasting career because I put a lot of effort into putting the word out about that. And so it's got some sentimental value to me. Completely forgot that I had contributed extras for the ebook. But so that I get nostalgic and I think about the people I was talking to and becoming friends with as we went through that process.
I will say, hand on heart, that period of time, sort of 2010 sort of era, was probably my happiest time as a writer. Just because we all had each other's back, we all helped each other. If somebody got a gig as an editor at some place, they were like, do you want in? And I know that's nepotism, and sometimes that can be a bad thing, but it was just allowing us to sort of have our voices heard. What you did after that was entirely up to you. And like you say, Paul Tremblay went on to bigger things. He'd had some work out with Cheesine, I think, at the time. So he was a little bit higher in terms on the rungs. But he never felt like that when he was in the forum. The only people really kind of that felt a little bit, because we called them the Holy Trinity, if you remember, which was Bear, Clevenger, and Jones. They would offer essays and they would drop in and give us advice because we were, obviously we held them in high regard. And at first it was Bear and Clevenger, if you remember. Jones came into it a bit later on.
Yep.
And Bear would just offer these essays on how to write sort of neo-noir type stuff. And as you do, when you sort of finding your feet as a writer, you are adopting the voices of your peers. You just borrow, you just kind of, parroting those voices. So it takes you a while to find your own voice, because for me, it was very Chuck Palahniuk, because I was at the Cult. I did the writers' workshops at the Cult, and then it got too toxic over there. It was a fucking mess. And then I migrated to the Velvet, which, was a much better place. And it did nurture talent. So then, you start to do more noir. I remember Stephen Graham Jones, All the Beautiful Sinners was more in that world.
Yeah.
He didn't just begin in horror. Neither did Tremblay. He didn't start in horror. They
Right.
were all sort of trying to, crime, something like that with, dark crime was kind of where they were at. Clevenger's remained true to his voice throughout. Bears remained true to his voice. But over the years, Stephen Graham Jones evolved. Paul Tremblay's evolved. Craig Davidson / Nick Cutter is evolved. And they've gone from the seed of that noir to horror. And it's been a wonderful, journey on the periphery to watch. Because. But you do question that. I was saying before we start, you do question 15 years in. I know, I'm here, and people just go, "Oh, is this his first book? Is this his debut?" And it's like, no, I have been around for a while. I've just dipped in and out, and I've just not really got the break I need yet. But hopefully, fingers crossed, that will happen in the future, and hopefully not posthumously, which is my worst fear. Is that they say, "Oh, he was brilliant. Why was he never recognized in his own time?" Yeah. I'm going to write a letter that my wife can read out if that happens. She can give a media statement.
Just make it really like prickly, like, you bastards.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, the perspective. So, the perspective I have about this is like, I look at that book, and some people have made the choice to stop writing. Some people are still writing. And I see you as a success. Oh. Like, I see you putting out these books and writing these incredible stories as like hugely successful. I see like Sadie Hartman talking about how much she enjoyed your stuff. And I'm like, I'm so happy, because like he's getting recognition. So, I know that there's layers to that, and it probably feels different, like, than what Paul or Stephen are experiencing. But like, I see this face out of all these books behind me. That's success to me.
Thank you.
So,
yeah. And that's how I should see it.
Well, yes, we'll just leave it like that. I guess. Yeah. Josh Mellerman says, making it is making it. So like making it, the actual making it of success is making the book. So,
yeah.
And I know that's like an easy for him to say because he's Josh Mellerman, but like, I love that the act of creation, the fact that you did the thing is success. And then anything that happens after that is just like benefits, bonuses. But I also want to talk about the anthology that I released 2 years to the day after that Warmed and Bound anthology, because you are also in that. The booked anthology, actually, I don't know how many people know this, but like, is not just a spiritual sibling to Warmed and Bound, but it's actually got DNA, because the InDesign files that were used to make Warmed and Bound were what we used to lay out the booked anthology. So it literally has the same, it came from the same file. So it shares actual like DNA. But that anthology was really cool because we invited people who had been at some point on our podcast to contribute a story to our anthology. And so different lineup, but Think Tank was the story that you contributed to that. Oh, yes. We had Fred Venturini's story at the beginning. is just such a gut punch. Craig Clevenger's in there. We got Cameron Pierce, Paul Tremblay's in there. Yeah, just a lot of the same names. Axel Tayari's in there. Amanda Gowin's got a story. I want to point out Bob Pastorella is in both anthologies as well.
Yeah.
So
Bob from This Is Horror.
Bob from This Is Horror, who had his book. Why am I blanking on that? Small Hours just recently came out on Ghoulish. David James Keaton, who's a buddy of mine, he's in there. Michael Paul Gonzalez, love that dude. So yeah, like I just thinking about talking to you gets me nostalgic about that stuff that we were working on back then. But I also look at those things as like, that is part of the reason the door opened for what we're doing now. So like the fact that we are sitting here having a conversation is because of that work that was being done back then and what we've done to carry through with that. I didn't have to continue podcasting for 15 years, but like that joy and the feeling that we experienced then is what compelled me to continue talking to authors and, talking about books and stuff. So
I was thinking about it, from the book days, whereas you and Livius, and the talent that you were able to, bring in then to where you are now.
Yeah.
I'm like in awe of where you've become, because I was looking back on the Arc Party back catalogue. You did the recent horror boom with Ellen Datlow and people, like real prestigious names in the horror world. And you continually do it. You've had Paul on again, and I'm just like, these are people who are getting articles written in major presses, and tabloids and stuff like that. They've got movies made of the books, and they're releasing the most, prestigious, well-renowned anthologies or whatever. They're the top tier, and you are in there with them. You are, you're interviewing, you're talking to them, and it's just like so wonderful that you've carried on that, and you've not changed. You've not changed at all. You are the same person I spoke to when The Sound of Loneliness came out in 2010 to us now chatting. There's no, you're not full of airs and graces. You're kind of down to earth. Let's just have a chat, and I think that as somebody who maybe reflects on their own career and goes, maybe I could have done better. I could have done this. I could have done that. I look at you as that kind of person who has remained constant throughout and maybe has had doubts, but you've never shown it. You've just continued to pump out just wonderful stuff. So, as I say, I'm very humbled that you've invited me back on here and listened to me rattle on about various things. But I'm just in awe, mate.
I'm going to cry. That means a lot. But I think that it's the funny thing about this relationship is that I exist because you do your work, right? And so I just have this love for story, and there was a gap between when I was doing that booked podcast and doing this, and obviously I had cancer and everything, so that was part of that. Yeah. But there was an absence. There was a hole in my life when I wasn't talking to people about books, and so there was it was an imperative. I needed to keep going. But I think it's important. And actually, it's become way more important for me recently to not just be one of 10 people talking to Stephen Graham Jones that week. Because back when I started, when we first met, there was one horror interview podcast, and that was This Is Horror. My podcast touched on lots of horror. But that's how you heard, whoever had a book coming out was a couple of sources, and now everybody's interviewing the same horror authors. And it's I'm kind of getting tired of being kind of lost in that. So right now for me, it is, I love talking to those kind of pillars of the of the community and everything. It's kind of nice that I can say I interviewed Daniel Kraus, who now has a Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah.
Like those are cool, and those conversations were fantastic. But I also want to, I wish everybody would take advantage of the incredible diversity of writers right now and highlight voices that aren't the same 10 people, like I think that there's enough podcasts happening, and I'm seeing more of that now where people are just like, oh, I this is horrible. I have someone on I haven't even heard of before. And I'm like, I'm so glad.
Yeah.
But I always, my North Star of interviewing people is who's a great talent who I just can't not talk to. And sometimes it's going to be a big name, and sometimes it's like going to be someone who isn't on a big 5 publisher and stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of my North Star. But like I've always admired, we're just really just kind of like complimenting each other at this point. But I've always
it's become a bit of a circle jerk now, isn't it?
I know. We have to like
no, but there's a point to that, and it is that we hear the same names over and over, and what it does is that fuels the algorithms. So what that happens is on social media, you just see the same names popping up on your feed, and you are feeding the beast at that stage. What we need to do is start to look at people outside of that cohort. There are always going to be those certain names in the mix. It's a bit like the Stokers. I can basically name who's going to win prior to seeing the long list or the short list. I kind of know, and it's unfortunate that that's the way it's gone, but that's the way it is. And you just have to go, right, well, that's what it is. But if I can maybe just pick up a book by somebody who's doing okay, but needs that extra, leap, then great. So, if Ross Jeffrey's got, The Devil's Pocketbook out through Clash coming up, fine. If L. Stevenson's got his book coming out through Trueborn, fine, let's do it. Scott Moses, yes. Let's bring in, some other people, Beverly Lee. Let's, I love Laurel Hightower, and she's getting there. But, we need to see more people like that. A.C. Hessenhauer, maybe I butchered her surname, apologies. But, she's starting off. She's just had a book come out through Cemetery Dance. Let's see where she goes. Yep. And you should be. They're always going to be there, the big names. Mailerman, Jones, Tremblay, whoever. They're just always going to be there. But let's also cherry pick people. And you do that thing where you do that great of having a big name, but then having somebody who's maybe not on people's radar.
Yep.
So you're able to bring in a bigger audience to your podcast. So that bigger audience can, people like me can feed off that. Because because you've brought in Tremblay, you brought in Tremblay Jones, because that's what people, and then they go, the art party, brilliant. And then they subscribe to it. And then I pop up and they go, who's this dude? And then they go, okay, I'll try that out, So we do need to focus on some of the voices, that need to be heard. And you're doing a great job of it, obviously. I'm not getting into that circle jerk again because you're.
I know, yeah. Let's
just stop.
But to that point, we had that moment that we loved back in the early 2010s, and I looked at some of these authors and I was like, "There's no way that Stephen Graham Jones doesn't go big at some point."
Yeah.
Paul, I could tell Paul had potential. So like what I'm getting at is like these authors who are kind of starting out or don't have a lot of momentum right now, some of those people are going to be the big names 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And like, how great is it if you've been along for that whole journey? Like, so just riding on the big, 10 names in horror is great because you can like, you can count on the books being good or whatever, but you got to pay attention to these starting out people too, because there are some powerhouses in there that one day you're going to be like, oh man, I've been around since, their first book came out. And like, that's going to be a cool feeling too, is like following the career of someone into greatness. So, I would never want to get complacent in following new voices.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And nobody else should. If like that's my challenge. And like it's one of the reasons I started doing these like preview episodes every month where I'm talking about a bunch of books. Like I just had an episode come out where we talked about 12 books that are coming out in August, is because like I could talk about 25 books in a year, or I can talk about like a dozen in depth and then another 100 or 150, you know, if I just do it as part of a list. So
more power to you.
And that's how we have a room this big, jam packed with like all these books.
Wow, that's an impressive library.
I had to move my office into the bigger bedroom in my apartment because the smaller bedroom couldn't fit all the books anymore. So where I sleep is in the smaller bedroom of my apartment. That's how much I care about books. So Craig, we're going to wrap it up because we've just been like, hugging each other.
I know. I'm quite sure we've obviously loads of people have stopped listening by now. I can say anything and nothing really matters at this point.
But so obviously we're encouraging people to pick up the instruction manual to being a vampire. I loved it. I think it's got so much power and it's entertaining. And we talked about some of the heavy stuff, but it's an entertaining book. It's easy to read. It's easy to get through. It touches on those heavy themes. It's very, like you said, character focused, but it's just a really entertaining read. So heavily encouraging people to pick up that book. Do you have any other kind of final thoughts or anything?
No, I think it is. If people are a bit hesitant to jump into it, thinking it's going to be very dark and a hard read, it isn't. It's all kind of handled well, I believe, and it's profound in areas. So even though don't take it the other way where you just think it's just going to be a laugh a minute. There are moments where it does hit quite hard. So hopefully I've found a decent mix there, and people will get something out of it.
Yeah, it's balanced. Well, I know it's been so long since we talked, but it's always a pleasure chatting with you. And one of the things that I loved most about this conversation was like hearing your thought process about the way that the story works and is built and constructed, and like your references to other authors and how they were effective. Like, man, that just tickles my brain. It was so fun hearing you talk about that stuff. So I miss you. I'm glad we got to talk again. And thank you so much for such an entertaining and awesome read. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Rob. I'm not going to say anything nice about you again because I think I've done it. But just thank you for allowing me the airspace. It's always appreciated. And hopefully, if I can, find a new home for my next book, which is There's Something in the Fucking Basement, I'll be on again. Hopefully. And we'll talk about that.
Open invitation. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.